On the afternoon of August 18, 1979, in front of 2,147 people at the Buchanan County Fair in Independence, Iowa, a man named Dale Pressler made the most expensive mistake of his life. He bet $10,000 cash, right there in front of everyone, that his brand new John Deere 4440 would beat his neighbor's rusty Farmall 560 in the tractor pull finals. The Farmall hadn't been washed in a decade. Its red paint had faded to something closer to dried blood. There was a dent in the hood from a hay bale that fell on it in 1972. The left rear fender was held on with baling-wire. Dale looked at that tractor and laughed so hard he nearly choked on his cigarette. $10,000, he announced, loud enough for half the grandstand to hear. 10,000 says that piece of junkyard scrap doesn't make it halfway down the track. The man standing beside the Farmall was named Eugene Holtz. He was 44 years old. He hadn't raised his voice in public since his wedding day. He looked at Dale, looked at the money, and said 4 words that would be repeated in that county for the next 40 years. "I'll take that bet." The crowd went silent. Then someone laughed. Then someone else. Within 30 seconds, 2,000 people were looking at Eugene Holtz like he'd completely lost his mind. And maybe he had, because on paper this wasn't even a contest. Now let me tell you why, and why the paper was completely wrong. Dale Pressler's John Deere 4440 was the most advanced tractor money could buy in 1979. Brand new from the dealership in Waterloo. Turbocharged 466 cubic inch diesel. Over 130 horsepower. Power shift transmission. Factory air conditioning. A sound-dampened cab that cost more than most farmers made in a year. Sticker price north of $45,000. Eugene's Farmall 560 was 18 years old. Naturally aspirated 6-cylinder. Maybe 60 horsepower on a good day. Bought used in 1967 for $2,800. By 1979, it had logged over 9,000 hours of hard work across his 280-acre operation. It was, by every measure, exactly what Dale called it. But there was something Dale didn't know about that tractor, something Eugene had never told a single person, and in about 15 minutes, the whole county was going to find out. Now let me tell you about these 2 men, because this story is not really about tractors. Dale Pressler came from what people in Buchanan County called old money, which in Iowa farming terms meant his grandfather had bought 800 acres during the Depression for pennies on the dollar. By 1979, the Pressler family owned over 2,200 acres of prime northeast Iowa farmland, and Dale had spent his adult life making sure everyone knew it. New truck every 2 years. Boots that cost more than most farmers' church suits. He sat on the county board, the co-op board, the church finance committee, not because he cared, but because he liked seeing his name on plaques. Every time a neighbor struggled, every time a farm went to auction, Dale was there with his checkbook, picking up the pieces at a discount. Eugene Holtz was different. His family came to Iowa in 1919, refugees from a failed homestead in Nebraska. His grandfather worked as a hired hand for 15 years before saving enough to buy 160 acres. Eugene's father expanded that to 280 by the time he died in 1965, leaving everything to his only son. Eugene spent the next 14 years doing exactly what his father and grandfather had done, working the land, paying his bills, keeping his head down. He didn't sit on boards. He didn't go to meetings. He spent most of his time in the barn or the fields. The Farmall 560 was the first tractor his father ever let him drive, back in 1962. He learned to plow on it, learned to cultivate on it, learned to understand what an engine was telling you by the sound it made and the way it pulled. When his father died, Eugene kept the Farmall running, not because he couldn't afford something newer, but because that tractor knew his land better than he did. And there was one other thing about that Farmall. One secret Eugene had stumbled onto in the winter of 1971 when he pulled the engine apart to replace a cracked head gasket. But stay with me, I'll get to that. Now let me tell you about the moment everything started. Eugene hadn't entered the tractor pull in years. He used to compete in the late 60s when his father was alive. After the old man died, he lost interest in most things that weren't directly related to keeping the farm running. So when he showed up at the registration table on the morning of August 18th, people were surprised. When they saw what he planned to compete with, they were confused. "Eugene," said Dorothy, the registration clerk who had known him since grade school, "you know this is the open class. You're going up against some serious iron." "I know. That Farmall's got to be, what, 18, 20 years old." "18, she runs fine." Dorothy looked past him at the tractor, parked in the staging area with rust streaks down its hood and an exhaust stack that was more black carbon than metal. She looked back at Eugene with something like pity. "Well," she said, "it's your entry fee." When Dale saw Eugene's name on the competitor list, he thought it was a joke. When he walked over and saw the Farmall, he made sure everyone within earshot knew what he thought. "Eugene Holtz," he said loudly. "I didn't know they were letting museum pieces compete this year." A few men laughed. Dale walked slowly around the tractor, kicking a tire, shaking his head, clicking his tongue. "You know what this thing is worth, Eugene? About $150, and that's if you sell it for scrap." He turned to Howard Vance, another competitor. "You know what that new cab on my 4440 cost? $12,000. Climate control, sound dampening. I could pull all day and never break a sweat." Then he turned back to Eugene. "Tell you what, I'll give you 500 cash for that tractor right now. Save yourself the embarrassment." Eugene looked at him for a long moment. "Not for sale." "Not for sale," Dale laughed. "In about 2 hours, that thing isn't going to be worth the diesel in its tank." Eugene shrugged. "We'll see." "Now let me ask you something. Have you ever been so completely certain of something that you couldn't even imagine being wrong?" That was Dale Pressler that afternoon. He wasn't nervous about that bet. He was excited. He was already writing the story in his head, how he'd made easy money off the county's most boring farmer and his piece of junk tractor. But pride has a way of setting traps. And Dale had just stepped into the biggest one of his life. The open class started at 4:30. 15 tractors. Dale's 4440 was the clear favorite. Eugene's Farmall was the oldest machine in the lineup by at least a decade, also the smallest. The first 7 tractors pulled distances between 187 and 300 feet. The International 1466 got a full pull, so did one of the Case tractors. The crowd was enjoying itself. Then it was Eugene's turn. He climbed up onto the Farmall and started the engine. It caught on the first try. Not a cough, not a sputter, a deep, healthy rumble that surprised people standing 20 feet away. Eugene let it warm up, then pulled forward to hook up to the sled. The track judge gave the signal. Eugene eased the clutch out. For the first 100 feet, it looked like any other pull. At 150, a few people started paying attention. At 200, the crowd leaned forward. At 250, people were on their feet. The Farmall's engine was screaming, a sound too big for the machine it was coming from. Exhaust stack shooting black smoke. Rear tires throwing up rooster tails of dirt. 275 feet. 290. The Farmall crossed the 300-foot line. Full pull. The crowd exploded. Eugene drove back to the staging area like nothing unusual had happened, shut off the engine, climbed down, walked to the water cooler without looking at anyone. Dale Pressler was standing 20 feet away. For the first time in as long as anyone could remember, he wasn't smiling. "Now I need to stop and tell you the secret, because this is what made everything possible. In the winter of 1971, when Eugene pulled the Farmall's engine apart to replace a cracked head gasket, he found something that didn't match any spec sheet he had ever seen. The cylinders were bored out. The pistons were heavier, different, higher compression ratio. The camshaft had a profile he didn't recognize. Someone had done serious work to this engine. Eugene made calls, did research, eventually found the answer. His Farmall had been a factory test mule. Back in 1962, International Harvester was developing what would become the Farmall 706, a bigger, more powerful successor to the 560 series. To test prototype components, they modified a batch of 560s with experimental engines. Most were scrapped when testing was done, but one somehow ended up at a dealership in Cedar Rapids, where it was sold as a standard used 560 in 1967. To Eugene's father, the modifications pushed the engine from 60 horsepower to somewhere between 85 and 90. Not enough to race a 4440, but a lot more tractor than it looked like. Eugene's father never knew. He just thought he'd bought a machine that ran exceptionally well. Eugene had known since 1971, and he never told anyone. There was no reason to. Until Dale Pressler bet $10,000 against it. The finals started at 5:30, 8 tractors, the sled now 2,000 pounds heavier. The first 4 pulled between 235 and 268 feet. Then Eugene again. The Farmall hooked up. Eugene gave it throttle, that same deep, impossible sound. At 250, the tires were spinning and grabbing. At 275, it looked like it might stall. But Eugene had been driving this machine for 17 years. He knew exactly how much it had, exactly when to hold, exactly how to keep the wheels biting. 287 feet. The Farmall stopped, engine straining, tires smoking, not a full pull, but 287 feet was the best distance in the finals so far. Dale climbed into his John Deere with the confidence of a man who'd already won. The 4440 started smooth and powerful. Dale hooked onto the sled and waited for the flag. It dropped. 100 feet, 150, 200, the crowd watching, waiting. At 278 feet, the rear tires broke loose. Dale tried to recover, shifted his weight, adjusted the throttle. The sled didn't move. The John Deere sat there spinning its wheels in place, going nowhere. 278 feet, 9 feet short. For a moment, nobody said a word. Then the crowd erupted. Dale Pressler sat in his $45,000 cab, staring straight ahead, as the realization sank in. He had lost. Eugene walked over quietly, reached into his shirt pocket, pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I'll take that 10,000 now," he said. Everyone was watching. 2,000 people who had heard Dale make the bet, who had laughed at Eugene and his rusted machine, all of them watching now. Dale's face went red, his jaw clenched. For a moment it looked like he might try to find a way out. But there were too many witnesses. He pulled out his checkbook, wrote the check, handed it to Eugene without looking at him. Eugene took it, folded it, put it in his pocket. He didn't smile, he didn't say a word, he just nodded once and walked back to his tractor. That night, Eugene Holtz became a legend in Buchanan County. And Dale Pressler's reputation, the one he'd spent 30 years building, began its long, slow collapse. Now let me tell you what happened after, because the tractor pull was just the beginning. Dale didn't take the loss well. He'd been humiliated in front of 2,000 people by a man he considered beneath him. In a small county, that kind of story doesn't fade. It grows. It gets told at diners and co-op meetings and church suppers, a little bigger every time. Within a month, Dale had become a punchline. So he did what proud men do when they're embarrassed. He doubled down. 2 months after the fair, Dale bought another 400 acres, $2,600 an acre, financed entirely through the bank. He wasn't buying land because he needed it. He was buying it to prove he was still the biggest, richest, most successful farmer in the county. It was the worst possible decision, at the worst possible time. Because 1980 was coming. Interest rates climbed into the high teens. Land values collapsed. Grain prices fell through the floor. Farmers who had borrowed against their land found themselves underwater, owing more than their farms were worth. By 1982, Dale owed the bank nearly $800,000. His collateral was worth maybe half that. Eugene Holtz had no debt. His father had paid off the last family loan in 1950. Eugene had never borrowed a dime. When the crisis hit, he tightened his belt and waited. The $10,000 he'd won from Dale went into a savings account. He never spent it. He said later it didn't feel like his money. It felt like a lesson he was supposed to keep. By 1985, Dale was facing foreclosure, letters from the bank, lawyers, a scheduled auction on March 15th. 3 days before the auction, Eugene drove up Dale's driveway. Dale's wife Martha answered the door, eyes red. "He's not seeing anyone." "I know," Eugene said, "just a minute." Dale was in the living room staring at the wall. When he saw Eugene, something flickered across his face. Shame, anger, resignation. "Come to gloat," he said. "Came to talk." Eugene sat down, cap in his hands. "I've got a proposition. I'll pay off your bank loan, all of it. In exchange, you deed me 600 acres, the original Pressler land, the ground your grandfather bought." Dale stared. "That's half the farm." "I know. That's nearly $400,000. 380. I talked to the bank yesterday." Dale couldn't speak for a long moment. "Why?" he finally said. "Why would you do that?" Eugene was quiet. Then, because that day at the fair, the 10,000, the bet, all of it, it was never about the money. It was about respect. You treated me like I was nothing. My tractor like it was nothing. 50 years of my family's work like it didn't matter because I didn't have a new John Deere. He looked at Dale directly. "I wanted you to see that you were wrong. That's all I ever wanted. I didn't want to destroy you. I didn't want your kids to lose their home." Dale wiped his face with the back of his hand. "If I say yes, what then?" "Then you keep farming. 1,600 acres, the buildings, the equipment. That's enough to make a living if you're careful. If you stop trying to be the biggest and start trying to be the smartest." Eugene stood, put his cap back on. "You've got until tomorrow morning. After that, I'm buying at the auction, and I won't be offering to leave you anything." He walked out without waiting for an answer. Dale said yes. The deal closed 3 days before the auction. Eugene paid $380,000. Dale signed over 600 acres his grandfather had bought 50 years earlier. He still had a farm. His children still had a home. And slowly, over the next few years, Dale Pressler became a different kind of man. He sold the John Deere 4440 in 1987, bought a used International that was 10 years old but ran fine. He stopped going to the showroom to look at new equipment. He started going to Eugene's barn to learn how to fix old equipment instead. The two men never became close friends, but they became something else. Neighbors who respected each other, who helped each other at planting and harvest, who nodded at the feed store without needing words. In 1994, 15 years after the tractor pull, Dale had a heart attack in his north field. Eugene found him driving past, saw the tractor sitting still in the middle of the field, went to check. He called the ambulance, sat with Dale in the dirt, kept him calm. Dale survived, but the doctor said he couldn't farm anymore. A month later, Dale asked Eugene to buy the remaining 1,600 acres. He didn't want it broken up. He wanted Eugene to have it. Eugene paid a fair price. Not a discount, not top dollar, just what the land was worth. And when the papers were signed, he did something that surprised the entire county. He gave 400 acres to Dale's oldest son, Michael, free and clear. No payment, no strings. Your grandfather built something here, Eugene told him. Your father almost lost it, but that doesn't mean your family has to leave. This land knows your name. Now let me ask you something. What do you think this story is really about? Is it about tractors? About a 1961 Farmall 560 that turned out to be more than it appeared? Is it about the money, the $10,000 bet? Maybe it's about all of those things, but I think it's about something simpler. It's about what happens when we measure ourselves against other people, when we need to be bigger, richer, more successful than the man next door, when we laugh at what we don't understand and bet against people we've never bothered to know. Dale Pressler spent 30 years building himself into the biggest farmer in Buchanan County. It took one afternoon, one bet, one pull, one loss to start tearing all of it down. Eugene Holtz never tried to be the biggest anything. He just tried to be good at what he did, careful with what he had, decent to the people around him. And when the man who laughed at him needed help, Eugene gave it. Not because he had forgotten the laughter, but because he understood something Dale never did. We're all just passing through. The land was here before us, and it'll be here long after we're gone. What matters isn't how much of it we own. What matters is what we leave behind for the people who come next. Eugene Holtz died in 2012 at the age of 77. He farmed until he was 75. The Farmall 560, the factory test mule that won the 1979 Buchanan County Fair, is still in the family barn. Eugene's grandson restored it a few years ago, stripped it to bare metal and built it back up. Every August during the county fair, they bring it out and park it near the pulled track. A small sign beside it tells the story, the bet, the pull, the upset nobody saw coming. People stop. They read the sign, they look at the tractor, they shake their heads. Hard to believe, they say. That rusty old thing beat a brand new John Deere. But if you look closely at that Farmall, if you know where to look, you can still see a number stamped into the engine block. A test mule designation from 1962. From the day some engineer at International Harvester decided to find out how much power they could pull from a 560 frame. They got enough, more than enough. And 60 years later, that tractor is still teaching the same lesson it taught Dale Pressler on a hot August afternoon in 1979. Don't laugh at what you don't understand. Don't bet against people you've underestimated. And never assume that what you see on the outside tells you anything about what's underneath. The rust doesn't matter. The dents don't matter. The baling wire doesn't matter. What matters is what's in the heart of the machine. And what's in the heart of the man who drives it.